wherever you've exhibited in the world, there's a special significance to showing in your hometown. I mean, having said that, a lot of artists have a more complex relationship with their hometown. I think a lot of people in general have a complicated relationship with where they come from, never mind artists. Some people love it, you know, and they would never leave, apart from in a box, you know. For some people it's like really a case of, you know, get out of Dodge. I think for the majority of people, they probably have a love-hate relationship with their hometown. And, you know, and I think I do too, you know, but just without the hate. Well, here we are in Priestley's, inside. It's shockingly different to how it was when it was Priestley's. When it was Priestley's, the punk rock shop, you know, which was, that was meant to be shocking. I'm more shocked by this, actually, just because of the transformation. In 1978 or 9, you know, this was a butcher's shop, Priestley's Family the Butchers. Priestley's Family Butchers, rather. And we took it over, and you know, we started printing T-shirts and things in here. Over here, actually, where Dave is, we had a carousel printer, and yeah, it's so hard to try and picture it all now. But I was just telling Anita where she is. We used to have a couple of Space Invader machines. And she said, "What's that?"
Don't want to give me
All my references fall on deaf ears these days. But yeah, it was a couple of Space Invaders machines here. And, you know, in all honesty, we never made a lot of money out of the T-shirts. And, but just down the road, there was a school called St. Peter's. Is it still there?
Yeah,
it's still there.
Yeah.
And the St. Peter's schoolboys used to come by. A lot of people would walk by because they would not want to come in because they would really not know what this place was. You didn't know if it was a mini-cab office or a brothel or, you know, what it was. But the St. Peter's schoolboys used to come in and they used to play the Space Invaders machines. And when they left, we'd unscrew the panel on the side and take out all the 10p's and go to Jackson's and buy some Cornish pasties or cans of lilt. And that's kind of how we'd survive, really. Every now and then we'd sell a T-shirt, you know. But, you know, it was never really a business. It was just more of a hangout, you know. And because York was never a place that was, you know, it never had a very big, there was never enough people in York in any one particular scene to actually have say a music scene or an art scene, you know. So anyone who was doing something slightly alternative was the watchword back then. So anyone who was doing anything slightly alternative would all group together, you know, and this is where they would come. I was mentioning earlier, you know, about how there weren't enough people in York to have a scene, you know, so that, so there weren't enough artists to have an art scene, you know, there weren't enough.
I don't want to say to you, you're a nice man.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
You are.
I hope this pub open again.
I would like it open again, yeah.
I do, yes.
Yeah. Why is it closed, you know?
I know really why.
You do?
Too much backwards.
Oh, really?
Unknown then, but they're going to save and I can't do with crackheads and smokers.
All
right.
Oh, well, see you later, pal. Yeah. Well, apparently, I don't know how reliable that information was, but gentlemen reckon there was too many crackheads in here. That wasn't my experience of it, you know. Mind you, crack didn't exist when I was coming here. But no, we used to just go in here and drink Yorkshire ale, you know. I always really loved the Dracula story. And, you know, coming here as a kid, there was a kind of Dracula culture, Rather, it was more of a Bram Stoker appreciation society, which consisted of maybe 10 people, and later on, with the growing interest or fashion for vampires and vampire films, that interest grew exponentially and grew into a goth fest, and people now come here from all over the world. Actually, the thing that I took from this was something I've spoken about before, which is a place where high and low culture can meet. Whitby, the self-catering years, the painting in the show. The paintings, I feel, perhaps in a very literal way, tend, I think, to speak for themselves and are suggestive of a narrative. And there isn't necessarily a lot to add to that, when it appears in the form of a book. But what I can say is that, we had a house here, well, rather, some relatives had a house here and they died and they left us it. And we used to stay in it when we came to Whitby, but, after the family decided, they needed some money and they wanted to sell it. After that, it was the self-catering years, it was self-catering, and that's really where that title came from. The Pelican books, of Penguin Books, dealt with sociological stuff happening in Britain after the war, and things like, the titles were often things like very prosaic titles such as "For Crop Rotation in Post-War Britain." Though prosaic, I often found that there was a lot of poetry, unintended poetry. I could immediately see those kind of fields, sort of very burnt brown fields with a sort of endless white sky, and relieved here and there by a crow maybe, and that was certainly not the intention of the author, to conjure up that kind of imagery, but it did, and for me it stopped the titles becoming too deadpan. I felt that Whitby, the self-catering years, fitted into that kind of category of prosaic title, but did, in fact, or hopefully would, create that idea of what that might be, a self-catering holiday in Whitby. The Abbey is probably the landmark that you're most and least aware of, because it's always there at the top of the hill. It's not that often you kind of really go and look around it, but you're just aware of it. Again, it's something that's kind of indelibly printed into my mind. It really informed the kind of shapes that appear at the bottom of the paintings. It's not by any means a kind of portrayal of the ruins, but it's certainly there in the texture and the shapes. It's this particular time of day that I'm often thinking about when I'm in the studio painting these pictures. There's something kind of fleeting about the light at this time of day, which, and obviously the tide, that I'm trying to capture. And I don't want to get too involved. The relationship to the movement of the paint has a very obvious relationship to the sea and the horizon. The stillness of the horizon. Those two contrasting moments, I think, are very much a part of the work, in the sense of the graphic horizon and a more kind of a lot more sort of movement elsewhere in the foreground. I've got some of that foreground in my shoes.
Whilst being back here, I found an old notebook in which I'd made a list of things to do in my life, and My heart kind of went out to my 15-year-old self because I hadn't done any of them. Though it has to be said, most of them were totally unrealistic. But most of them also seem to involve travelling, far away from here. This has been a place where people have set sail from, and well, that's something I kind of ended up doing myself. The more I travelled, the more I kind of became defined by where I'd left, and that's where I think these paintings come from, this persistent sense of place. Which isn't to say that I needn't have bothered going anywhere, if I hadn't, I never would have made these paintings.